Lucas Kane's day was already off to a terrible start when the flashing lights on his console screamed asterisk. Critical system failure. Asterisk. He smacked the controls with the desperation of a man trying to keep his coffee from spilling. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered, staring out at the swirling green planet below. So much for autopilot being reliable. The ship shook violently as the atmosphere gripped it like a giant's fist. Alarms blared, and Lucas cursed every engineer who thought touchscreens in turbulence were a good idea. The descent wasn't graceful, more like a drunken belly flop from orbit. His ship skidded across a field of oversized bluegrass, finally crashing into something that groaned under the impact. Still alive? Lucas whispered. That's gotta count for something. Unbuckling his harness, he stumbled out, coughing as acrid smoke wafted from the ruined cockpit. He tugged on his helmet, activating the translator in his suit. All right, Translator 2.0, don't let me down now. His first steps sank ankle-deep into the alien soil. The ground squelched unpleasantly, and Lucas grimaced. Gross. First impressions are everything, huh? His sarcasm barely had time to register before a shadow blotted out the twin suns. Lucas looked up, then kept looking up. A pair of impossibly long legs ended in armor that glittered with what looked like living, pulsing veins. Above them stood a face so sharp and commanding it could have been carved from marble. Tiny traveler, the figure boomed, her voice carrying both authority and the faintest trace of amusement. You have arrived as foretold. Lucas's suit fumbled to translate her words. I come in peace, he offered, realizing too late something had gone hilariously wrong. The towering woman arched an eyebrow. You bring offerings of vegetation? Strange but welcome. Before Lucas could correct her, a second giantess emerged, this one holding a staff that seemed to hum with energy. Raya, she said to the first. He's smaller than I imagined. Are we sure this is the one? Hey! Lucas protested, waving his arms. I'm standing right here. The translator blurted out. I am standing right to be harvested. He groaned. Stupid machine. The one called Raya leaned closer, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. Lucas tried not to flinch. He is the one, she said decisively. The prophecy spoke of a traveler from the stars, small of stature but vast in potential. Lucas raised a finger. Hold up. Vast in potential? That sounds promising. What exactly am I being signed up for? The answer came not from Raya but from the dozens of other figures now emerging from the surrounding foliage. All of them were similarly massive, their armor organic and regal, their faces lit with curiosity. Lucas found himself surrounded, a human cork bobbing in a sea of towering women. You, Raya said, her lips curving into what might have been a smile, are to participate in the choosing ceremony. You will choose among us to ensure the survival of our people. Lucas blinked. Wait, what now? Another giantess stepped forward, this one with wild hair and a mischievous grin. He doesn't understand, she said, chuckling. You're here to pick one of us as your mate. Lucas's brain stalled, rebooted, and immediately wanted to blue screen again. Mate? As in? Yes, the mischievous one said, her grin widening. As in what you think. Unless your species has other peculiar rituals we should know about? I don't think. Lucas started, but she cut him off. Don't worry, little man. We'll make it easy for you. Easy? Lucas doubted that. Being the center of attention in a group this large, this intimidating, and this muscular was the exact opposite of easy. He tried for a diplomatic response, but his mouth betrayed him. Can I just, crash here for a bit without the whole mating thing? The crowd erupted in laughter, their voices like a rolling storm. Raya's smile turned sharp. No, tiny traveler. The choosing is not optional. Lucas sighed. Of course it wasn't. The village square was an arena of activity, and Lucas found himself at its center, perched on an elaborate platform that swayed unnervingly under his weight. For a tribe of giants, they sure didn't seem to build things with stability in mind. He tugged at the ridiculous outfit they'd put him in, some kind of ceremonial robe that looked like it was stitched together from leftover tablecloths. The giant women gathered in a semicircle, their expressions a mix of expectation and amusement. Raya, standing at the forefront, raised her arms. The crowd quieted. Today, our people honor tradition and survival. Today, the tiny traveler will choose among us, and together, we will secure our future. Lucas leaned into his microphone, which was comically oversized for his hand. Just so we're clear, when you say secure the future, you mean? His voice echoed awkwardly. Talia, the mischievous one, cut in from the crowd. She means you're picking your favorite. Don't overthink it, little guy. The laughter that followed was booming, nearly shaking him off the platform. Lucas muttered into the mic. Oh, great, no pressure or anything. The first contestant stepped forward, Raya herself. She strode with the confidence of someone who crushed boulders for breakfast, which, judging by the chunk of rock in her hand, might have been literal. She held it aloft, then squeezed. The boulder cracked, crumbled, and turned to dust in her grip. This, she said, her voice commanding, is the strength I bring. Strength to protect, to lead, and to crush those who threaten our people. She tossed the remaining dust aside, then shot Lucas a pointed look. And perhaps to keep a fragile little mate safe, no? Lucas swallowed. Safe is good. Crushing, less so. The next woman was Viola, the scientist. She carried a glowing orb that pulsed with a rhythmic hum. Strength is valuable, she began. But knowledge is power. With the advancements I've made in genetic compatibility technology, I can ensure your tiny physiology thrives among us. Lucas said, unsure how to respond. Viola held up the orb dramatically, but instead of a seamless demonstration, the device began to sputter and hiss. It let out a loud pop and exploded into a shower of harmless sparks. The crowd murmured in disapproval. Viola, unfazed, turned to Lucas. The prototype needs work, but the concept remains flawless. Imagine what we could achieve together. Lucas rubbed his temples. Yeah, imagining lots of sparks. Great start. Before he could recover, the third woman bounded forward. Talia, ever the entertainer, carried no props. She simply spread her arms wide, a sly grin on her face. Lucas, let me make this easy. Sure, they've got strength and brains, but what do you really need to survive here? A sense of humor. She gestured to herself. Who else is going to make you laugh while you're trying to climb onto furniture 3 times your size? Fair point, Lucas admitted. And, she continued, I promise I'll never judge you for the tiny. She paused for dramatic effect. Steps you'll take to adapt here. The crowd roared, some clapping, others shaking their heads. Lucas raised a finger. Okay, that one was mean, but I'll allow it. The last contestant was Mira, the shy one. She approached slowly, almost hesitating. Her long, delicate braids shimmered in the sunlight, but her gaze stayed firmly on the ground. I don't have strength like Raya, she began, her voice soft but carrying in the quiet. And I'm not as clever as Viola or funny as Talia. But I will do my best to care for you. Lucas blinked. That's surprisingly sweet. And, she added, glancing up briefly, her cheeks darkening with what could only be the Amazither equivalent of a blush. I promise I'll try not to break you. The silence was shattered by an uproar of laughter. Even Lucas couldn't help but chuckle nervously. Trying not to break me is a solid bonus, he said, mostly to himself. The ceremony wrapped up with all eyes on Lucas. He felt the weight of their expectations, and not just because they were all at least 3 times his size. How was he supposed to choose? They were all intimidating in their own ways, some in ways that made him want to run, others in ways that made him want to stay just to figure them out. He stood there, scanning their faces, stalling as best he could. Well, I mean, this is a big decision, right? Can't rush these things. What if we... I don't know, just all went with a group decision instead? A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Raya looked particularly scandalized. The prophecy speaks of one bond, tiny traveler. Not indecision. Talia leaned on her staff, smirking. You know, I think he just volunteered for everyone. Lucas's eyes widened. Wait, that's not what I... The tension was broken by a deep, guttural roar from the distance. Heads turned sharply toward the forest's edge, where the trees swayed violently, parting to reveal massive figures emerging from the shadows. Lucas barely had time to register what was happening before the ceremony descended into chaos. The ground trembled beneath Lucas's feet as the figures stepped into the clearing, each as large as the Amazitha women but bulkier, their bodies adorned with jagged armor and primitive weapons. Their faces were fierce and angular, their eyes scanning the crowd with predatory intent. Lucas couldn't help but think they looked like the cover models of a barbarian fantasy novel, minus the charm. Raya stepped forward, her voice a commanding boom. You dare disrupt the sacred choosing? State your purpose, or face the consequences. One of the intruders, broader than the rest and carrying a club that seemed more like a fallen tree, snarled. We come for what is rightfully ours. Your tribe grows weak, Raya. The men of the Tharnak will take control of your lands, and your future. Lucas blinked, inching back instinctively. Does anyone else think we should talk this out? Maybe a nice group therapy session? The translator in his suit decided to interpret his words as, shall we resolve this through collective mating agreements? The gathered Amazither snorted with barely contained laughter, even as the Tharnak leader glared at him. Raya ignored Lucas's blunder and raised her blade, a sleek, organic weapon that pulsed faintly as if alive. The future is ours to decide, Grakner. Leave, or I will carve your arrogance into the soil. Talia nudged Lucas with a massive finger, leaning down to whisper conspiratorially. Isn't she just the picture of romantic charm? Lucas groaned. Not the time. The Tharnak men growled in unison, but before they could advance, Viola activated a device at her side. A shimmering barrier sprang up around the village, a translucent dome of energy that pulsed with vibrant hues. The Tharnak warriors hesitated, their leader growling. Hiding behind your toys, as always. Viola smirked. It's called strategy, Grakner. Maybe you should try it sometime instead of swinging sticks around like a caveman. Lucas looked between the two groups, his survival instincts kicking into high gear. Okay, so, just spitballing here, what if we didn't escalate this? Like maybe we all sit down, I make some tea, and we discuss how not to kill each other? Raya ignored him, her focus locked on the intruders. Mira, however, gently pulled Lucas aside, her enormous hands surprisingly careful as she maneuvered him behind a nearby structure. Stay here, she said softly, her voice trembling. You'll be safer. Lucas sighed, knowing better than to argue. Sure, because hiding behind a giant wall of muscle has worked so well for me so far. Outside the barrier, the Tharnak warriors roared and charged, their weapons colliding with the shimmering dome. The sound reverberated like a gong, and Lucas winced. The Amazitha warriors formed a line, their weapons drawn, ready for the moment the barrier faltered. Talia stood next to him, still grinning despite the tension. You know, she said casually, if this doesn't scream first-date material, I don't know what does. Lucas shot her a look. Is everything a joke to you? Only the fun parts. She quipped, winking. The barrier flickered, and Viola's expression tightened. It won't hold much longer. Their brute force is overwhelming the generator. Raya turned to Lucas, her eyes narrowing. Tiny traveler, this is your chance to prove your worth. Use your cunning. Find a way to turn the tide. Lucas blinked. What part of crash-landed space tourist screams cunning to you? You were chosen for a reason, Raya snapped. Think, Lucas. What would your people do? He hesitated, scanning the scene. The Tharnak warriors were relentless, hammering at the barrier with a single-minded intensity. The Amazitha were strong, but their numbers were smaller, and the odds didn't look great. Lucas bit his lip, an idea forming. He turned to Viola. That barrier, it's powered by your tech, right? Can you reverse the energy flow? Viola frowned. Reverse it? Why? Lucas gestured wildly. Just trust me. Can you do it or not? She hesitated, then nodded. I can. But it'll destabilize the whole system. Perfect, Lucas said, grinning despite himself. Do it. Viola muttered something about reckless humans but began tinkering with the device. The barrier shimmered, its colors intensifying. The Tharnak warriors hesitated, sensing the change, but it was too late. With a deafening hum, the energy dome inverted, blasting outward in a wave of kinetic force. The Tharnak warriors were thrown back like ragdolls, landing in crumpled heaps across the field. Lucas watched, breathless, as the dust settled. The Amazither erupted in cheers, their victory cemented. Raya approached Lucas, her expression unreadable. You risked everything, she said finally. And it worked. Perhaps the prophecy was right about you. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Perhaps? I just saved everyone's giant butts, and I'm still only a perhaps. Talia laughed, clapping him on the back hard enough to nearly knock him over. You've got spunk, little guy. I like that. Lucas sighed, rubbing his shoulder. If this is what impressing you people looks like, I might not survive the next round. With the Tharnak retreating into the forest, the Amazither celebrated their hard-won victory with a feast as grand and intimidating as their stature. Tables groaned under the weight of massive platters filled with unfamiliar but oddly appetizing foods. Lucas, seated at the head table like some kind of conquering hero, stared at his oversized plate. A single serving for the Amazither looked like enough to feed him for a week. Raya raised her goblet, her voice cutting through the noise. Tonight, we honor not only our strength but also the cunning of the tiny traveler. Against all odds, he has proven himself a worthy ally to our tribe. The crowd roared its approval, pounding the table so vigorously that Lucas nearly toppled over. He waved sheepishly, trying not to look as overwhelmed as he felt. Thanks, everyone. Just doing my, tiny part. Talia leaned over, smirking. You've got a knack for dramatic timing, Lucas. First the choosing, then saving the day. If I didn't know better, I'd say you planned all this just to impress us. Lucas gave her a flat look. Oh yeah, crash landing on an alien planet and almost dying repeatedly? Totally my idea of a good time. She laughed, tossing a grape the size of a baseball into her mouth. Careful, or we'll start thinking you enjoy our company. As the evening wore on, Lucas found himself relaxing for the first time since his arrival. The Amazither were intimidating, sure, but their camaraderie was infectious. He even managed to crack a few jokes, earning a genuine smile from Mira and another round of booming laughter from the others. Still, the reality of his situation lingered at the back of his mind. The choosing ceremony wasn't just a quaint tradition, it was a matter of survival for the Amazither. And now, thanks to his earlier heroics, the expectations placed on him felt heavier than ever. Raya approached, her expression softer than he'd seen before. You've proven yourself today, Lucas. But the path ahead remains uncertain. The Tharnak will return, stronger and more determined. We must be ready. Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. And by we you mean me, right? Not alone, Raya said firmly. You are part of our tribe now, whether you accept it or not. And we protect our own. The weight of her words hit him, but before he could respond, Viola appeared, holding a small device that glowed faintly. Lucas, I've analyzed the energy residue from the barrier inversion. Your idea was unconventional, but it gave me an idea for a more sustainable defense system. With your input, we could refine it further. Lucas blinked, caught off guard. My input? You're the genius here. Genius needs inspiration, she replied, her tone matter-of-fact. And you seem to have a knack for unconventional thinking. He glanced at the device, then at the expectant faces around him. No pressure or anything, he muttered, though he couldn't suppress a small smile. As the night wore on, the celebration began to wind down, the Amazither retreating to their towering homes. Lucas, however, found himself lingering in the square, staring up at the twin moons that hung low in the sky. Mira approached quietly, her steps careful as if afraid to disturb him. You're thinking about home, she said softly, more a statement than a question. Lucas nodded. Yeah. It's hard not to. He glanced at her, noting the way the moonlight softened her features. But this place, it's starting to feel a little less alien. Thanks to you and the others. She smiled faintly, her gaze dropping to her hands. We're lucky you found us. Even if you don't feel the same. He chuckled, shaking his head. Lucky isn't the word I'd use. But I'm starting to think this whole prophecy thing might not be as crazy as I thought. Before she could respond, Talia's voice rang out from a nearby building. Mira! Stop hogging him! Some of us want to say goodnight too. Mira flushed, mumbling a quick farewell before retreating. Lucas laughed under his breath, shaking his head. As he made his way back to the quarters they prepared for him, far too spacious but surprisingly comfortable, Lucas couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn his life had taken. He'd gone from a stranded spacefarer to an honorary member of an alien tribe, navigating challenges that ranged from comical to life-threatening. And yet, for the first time since crash landing on this bizarre planet, he didn't feel so alone. Whatever the future held, whether it was more battles, awkward ceremonies, or figuring out how to survive among giants, he had a feeling he'd find a way to make it work. After all, if humanity had one thing going for it, it was adaptability. As he lay down on a bed that felt more like a trampoline, he couldn't help but smirk. Well, Lucas, he muttered to himself. Welcome to your weird new normal.